All right, welcome back to Blue City Reviews. I've been covering a string of psychological thrillers from 1992. Next up on the list was Jennifer 8. This is a film I've always been fond of. Unfortunately, critics and audiences alike at the time were not, and I don't quite understand why. This is one of those serial killer-esque thrillers that was released in that sweet spot after Silence of the Lambs, but before Seven. So you had a ton of stuff that was trying to ride on the success of Silence of the Lambs. After that, this is one of the best, if not the best, of that group. But once Seven was released, which Seven is a masterpiece, David Fincher was and still is ahead of his time. But once Seven was released, you'll notice the whole sort of genre shifted because most filmmakers and producers and studios, yada yada, didn't understand what made Seven so good, and a lot of the thrillers like that ended up wallowing in the violence and the suffering and the depravity a little bit too much, way too much, and to the point where that became all the movies were about, and you ended up getting shit like the Saw series and Hostel, and all of that was a direct offshoot of Seven, which began with Silence of the Lambs. But before Seven, you had stuff like this, which didn't have a whole lot of graphic violence. Not that Seven did, but this definitely is more refined and more subtle. The plot involves a burned out cop on the pursuit of a serial killer that only targets blind women. And Uma Thurman is his only witness. And Uma Thurman is so good in this. You know, when you got to admit, when you're watching actresses that you know aren't blind, you're looking for holes in their performance. It's just human nature. You're like, okay, I know she's not blind. You know, let's see where she fumbles. And she does not. She creates a very believable character here, especially a character who's been maybe being stalked by a serial killer. Yeah, you're gonna be a little pale and timid. I read a Roger Ebert's review where one of my favorite reviewers of that era, but he just rips this new movie an new asshole and goes so far as to say, yo, all the blind people I know would be out partying. Really, Roger? With a serial killer on your heels? The fuck? Whatever. I know the director originally wanted Al Pacino for this role, and it still talks shit about the movie. Oh, Andy Garcia was great, but if we'd only gotten Al Pacino... Dude, come on. If you can't get Al Pacino, Andy Garcia is the next greatest thing. I get he wanted an actor who was a little older to add to the tension in the love relationship that blossoms between the two, but Andy Garcia does great here, and certainly is a pretty good bargain. I think the director might want to take the stick out of his ass. The supporting cast, boom, phenomenal. John Malkovich shows up in the last act of this and steals the fucking show. Ow! He is so good in this. Kathy Baker, who I've always thought was an underrated actress, Mr. Frost, where she's the therapist trying to talk to essentially Satan, played by Jeff Goldblum, is an underrated film. Also, Lance Henriksen is in this. And who doesn't love Lance Henriksen? But this was during a time when he was really sifting through roles he was being a little bit more choosier about the stuff he acts in. I gotta say, it's iffy now when I rent a Lance Henriksen movie. Back in these days, even if he was in it for a scene or two, it usually turned out to be a really good flick. But again, it's John Malkovich that shows up and steals the show. His interrogation scenes with Andy Garcia are just pure fucking gold. If you haven't seen this movie, it's worth sitting through the entire 2-hour running time just to watch those segments, because it's like A plus 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 infinity plus acting. And I'm not exaggerating. Those sequences are some of the best I've seen in any film. The ending to this, like the twist at the end, really blew me away at the time, and it still does. It's aged remarkably well, especially in 2021. I think doing a typical guy showing up and shooting the bad guy ending would just be more blah bullshit at this point. What they did here, I thought was really cool. Like, yeah, you go, man. The score by Christopher Young, I don't think Christopher Young has ever done a mediocre score, but this score is one of his 10 best. This is when he was at his peak, by my estimation. This is shortly after Hellraiser, maybe a few years after Hellbound, but long before he'd go on to more of the synth stuff, like the Pet Sematary remake and Sinister, more like when he was just working with computers and sound effects and shit like that. He did this pretty much the same year as The Dark Half, I would imagine. And it has a lot of similarities to his score for The Dark Half, which is my favorite horror score of all time. I think that score is pure fucking magic. But this isn't far off. This isn't on that level, but this is not far off. I hear the director and or producers fired the original composer to get Christopher Young on, and that is a wise decision. With all due respect to whoever that gentleman was, Christopher Young, this is his subject matter, and he brings an audioscape to this that is very hypnotic and engrossing. In short, I love this film. If you can't tell, actually, the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm realizing I see this. If you haven't seen Jennifer 8 or you haven't seen it like me in 10, 20 years, I can't even remember the last time I watched it, you should check it out, man. The performances alone make this well worth your time. Yeah, the script could have used some tightening up, and you could tell maybe there is some studio meddling, and yeah, as I said, they were sort of riding on the success of the Silence of the Lambs thing, but there's more to it than that, and you can tell the cast was dedicated, and I think this film works. I think this is one of those films that time forgot but shouldn't have. I think that if people went back and rewatched this, they'd be like, wow, this is better than a lot of the bullshit that I'm spending my time streaming nowadays. So anyways, Jennifer 8 from 1992. Thanks once again for watching Blue City Reviews. I might talk about Black Widow a little bit. So cheers.